The darkness of space tore apart like fabric being ripped in half. First one ship appeared, then 10, then hundreds, then thousands. The Velcrin Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system, their massive warships blocking out the stars behind them. 9,700 vessels arranged themselves in perfect formation. Each one large, enough to carry 10,000 soldiers and powerful enough to burn a planet's surface to glass. Commander Talth stood on the bridge of the flagship Dominion's Fist, watching the blue-green planet called Earth appear on his viewscreen. He was a veteran of 43 conquest campaigns, and this mission bored him already. The intelligence reports showed that humans had barely left their home planet. They had a few stations on their moon and some mining. Operations on the red planet they called Mars, primitive, barely worth the fuel costs of the journey. The Velcrin Empire had conquered 847 worlds over 3,000 years. They were masters of warfare, perfecters of invasion strategy, rulers of a quarter of the galaxy. This Earth would be number 848. Talth expected the whole operation to take less than a week. Some species surrendered immediately when they saw the fleet. Others fought for a few days before accepting the inevitable. Either way, it always ended the same. Talth's second officer approached him with the standard ultimatum message prepared. It had been translated into the dominant human languages. The message was simple and had been used thousands of times before. Surrender within 72 hours or face complete extermination. The message included holographic images of destroyed worlds, cities burning, populations being relocated to work camps. The images usually convinced even the most stubborn species to submit on Earth. Alarms screamed across every military installation on the planet. Admiral Hyan Wu was in his office at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters in Geneva when the emergency call came through. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many war games and simulation exercises. He had spent 30 years preparing for this exact moment, hoping it would never come. Knowing it probably would, the detection satellites had picked up the Velcrin fleet 80 minutes ago. 18 minutes. That was all the warning humanity had received before 9,700 alien warships appeared at their doorstep. Hanwu moved quickly to the command center, where dozens of officers were already working at their stations. The main screen showed the Velcrin formation, each red dot representing a ship that could destroy a city with a single weapon. Hyanwu's hands were steady as he activated the emergency protocols. Across Earth, military bases went to full alert. Weapons platforms that had been hidden for decades began powering up. Soldiers who had trained for an invasion that might never come suddenly found their training becoming reality. The United Earth Defense Force had been established 60 years ago, with one purpose: prepare for the day when humanity would meet hostile aliens. That day had arrived. President G1 was pulled from an economic summit in Tokyo and rushed to the underground command bunker beneath the city. She was a former military officer herself, elected because people trusted her to keep Earth safe. Now she had to prove that trust was deserved. The World Council assembled within 20 minutes. Leaders from every nation appearing on screens around the secure conference room, the Velcrin. Ultimatum arrived exactly 1 hour after the fleet's appearance. President G1 watched the holographic message with the other council members. She saw the burning cities, the destroyed ships, the conquered populations. The Velcrin commander's face appeared, proud and confident, as he delivered his demand. Surrender or die, simple, final. The room was silent when the message ended. Some of the council members looked terrified. Others looked angry. President G1 looked at Admiral Hyan Wu, who stood at the edge of the room. He gave her a small nod. They had prepared for this. Maybe they would lose. Probably they would lose. But humanity would not surrender without fighting. President G1's voice was calm when she spoke. Activate the Kuiper defense grid. Deploy all available fleet assets. Send Captain Dae Hyan to deliver our response. Captain Dae Hyan was 28 years old and commanded the corvette Indomitable, one of the smallest ships in the UEDF fleet. He had been chosen for this mission not because his ship was powerful, But because it was fast and because Daehyun had nerves of steel, his orders were simple: approach the Velcrin flagship and deliver Earth's response message. The Indomitable was a small ship, barely 200 meters long, but it was packed with the best technology humanity could build. Daehyun and his crew of 43 people knew they were probably flying to their deaths. The Velcrins could destroy them with a single shot. But someone had to deliver the message, and they had volunteered. As the Indomitable accelerated toward the Velcrin fleet, Daehyun recorded the message that President G1 had approved. It was not long. It was not complicated. When translated into the Velcrin language, it was only 2 words. Come try. Commander Talth received the message on the bridge of Dominion's Fist. He watched the small human ship approach, then turn and flee back toward Earth. He listened to the 2-word message 3 times, certain he had misunderstood. His officers looked at him, confused. Was this human humor? Were they truly this stupid? Talth had seen many responses to his ultimatums over the years. He had seen desperate pleas for mercy, offers of tribute, promises of peaceful surrender. He had seen defiant speeches about honor and freedom that meant nothing when the bombs started falling. But he had never seen this. 2 words. Come try. As if 9,700 warships were not enough to make them understand their situation. Talth felt something he had not felt in many years: anger. These primitive humans dared to mock the Velcrin Empire. They thought their tiny fleet and basic weapons could stand against 3,000 years of military superiority? He would teach them the price of arrogance. The commander issued his orders. The first wave would advance immediately. 3,000 ships, more than enough to crush any defense these humans might have prepared. The fleet began moving toward Earth, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space. In the distance, the blue planet waited, small and fragile and about to learn what it meant to defy the Empire. On Earth, Admiral Hyun-woo watched the Velcrin fleet begin its approach. He sent one final message to all Ueda forces across the solar system: make them pay for every meter. In the Kuiper Belt at the edge of the solar system, thousands of weapon platforms disguised as asteroids received their activation codes. They had been built over 80 years in complete secrecy, constructed by automated factories far from Earth where no spy satellite could see them. Each platform was small, little more than a railgun and a nuclear reactor. But there were thousands of them. The Velcrins did not know about the Kuiper defense grid. They did not know that humanity had spent almost a century preparing for this day. They did not know that humans had studied every alien encounter, every first contact scenario, and had built their entire defensive strategy around one assumption. Someday, someone would come to conquer Earth. Commander Talth would learn soon enough. The first Velcrin ships were approaching the Kuiper Belt now, their shields up, their weapons ready for whatever primitive resistance these humans might offer. In a few minutes, the battle would begin, and the Velcrins expected it to be over quickly. They were right about one thing. It would begin quickly, but it would not be over quickly, and it would not end the way they expected. The first Velcrin ships crossed into the Kuiper Belt without concern. Their sensors detected thousands of small objects floating in the darkness, but that was normal. All solar systems had debris fields at their edges. Commander Talth watched from his flagship as the lead vessels pushed deeper into human territory. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Then the asteroids opened fire. 3,000 railgun platforms activated simultaneously. Metal slugs the size of buses accelerated to 30,000 kilometers per second, moving so fast they became streaks of light in the darkness. The first Velcrin ship never knew what hit it. One moment it was cruising forward with shields raised. The next moment a railgun slug punched through the shield like it wasn't there, tore through the hull and exited the other side. The ship broke apart in a silent explosion. Talth stood frozen on his bridge as the displays lit up with damage reports. 10 ships destroyed, 20, 50, the numbers climbed faster than he could read them. His shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, but these were solid projectiles moving at speeds his shields couldn't stop. The Velcrin Empire had not fought an enemy using kinetic weapons in over 1,000 years. It was considered primitive, inefficient, outdated. The humans apparently didn't care what was considered outdated. Within 7 minutes, 400 Velcrin ships were gone. The survivors scattered, trying to identify targets and return fire. But the weapons platforms were small and spread across billions of kilometers of space. The Velcrins had to get close to hit them, and getting close meant entering the range of more RALGUNS. Admiral Hyon Wu watched the battle from Earth Command Center with grim satisfaction. The Kuiper defense grid was performing exactly as designed. It wouldn't stop the invasion, but it would make the Velcrins pay. Every ship destroyed was one less ship that could bombard Earth. Every minute the battle lasted was another minute to prepare. The inner system defenses, Talth finally regained his composure and started giving orders. He commanded the second wave to join the first. 6,000 Velcrin ships now pushed into the Kuiper belt, their weapons blazing as they tried to destroy the human platforms. They succeeded, but slowly. The platforms were hard to hit, and there were thousands of them. For every platform destroyed, the Velcrins lost 2 more ships. Lieutenant Haniel commanded a squadron of 12 stealth fighters operating from a hidden base on Neptune's moon Triton. Her fighters were small, barely large enough for a single pilot, but they were coated in materials that made them nearly invisible to sensors. She had been waiting in the dark for 6 hours, watching the Velcrin fleet advance. Waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came when a damaged Velcrin cruiser separated from its formation, limping away from the battle with its shields flickering. Haniel's squadron moved in like sharks smelling blood. They attacked from 6 different directions at once, their missiles targeting the damaged sections of the cruiser's hull. The Velcrin ship tried to defend itself, but it was too slow, too hurt. It died without taking any of Haniel's fighters with it. The humans fought differently than any enemy the Velcrins had ever faced. There was no honor in their tactics, no respect for the rules of warfare. They didn't meet the Velcrin fleet in open battle. Instead, they hid in the darkness and struck from ambush. They targeted damaged ships like predators culling the weak from a herd. They used computer viruses transmitted through communication channels, causing Velcrin ships to malfunction at critical moments. One human tactic particularly disturbed the Velcrins. Damaged human ships, vessels that were clearly dying, would accelerate at full speed directly toward Velcrin vessels and detonate their reactors on impact. The Velcrins called it suicide. The humans called it making every death count. As the Velcrin fleet pushed past the Kuiper belt and approached the orbit of Neptune, they encountered the second line of defense. Mines, thousands of mines disguised as ordinary space debris, floating dormant until Velcrin ships came within range. The mines were simple devices, just explosives with basic sensors, but they were effective. More Velcrin ships died, their hulls torn open by explosions they never saw coming. Commander Talth realized he had seriously underestimated these humans. The intelligence reports had said they were primitive, barely capable of spaceflight. But this defense network must have taken decades to build. Maybe longer. These humans had been preparing for invasion long before the Velcrins even knew Earth existed. By the time the fleet reached Mars, Talth had lost 1,200 ships. 1,200 vessels destroyed by a species that shouldn't even have posed a challenge. His officers were shaken. Some were beginning to question whether this conquest was worth the cost. Talth silenced such talk immediately. The Velcrin Empire did not retreat. The Velcrin Empire did not admit defeat. They would take Earth no matter how many ships it cost. Engineer Minji worked in the Mars Defense Coordination Center, buried 3 kilometers beneath the red planet's surface. She was responsible for the weapons platforms hidden in Martian orbit and on the moon Phobos. When the Velcrin fleet came within range, she activated every weapon at once. The Velcrins expected Mars to be lightly defended. It was just a mining colony, barely inhabited, not worth protecting. They were wrong. Humanity had fortified Mars heavily, turning it into a fortress that guarded the approach to Earth. Laser arrays mounted on Phobos began firing, their beams invisible in the vacuum but deadly when they touched Velcrin hulls. Missile platforms in Mars orbit launched their payloads. Hundreds of warheads streaking toward the enemy fleet. The battle for Mars orbit lasted 6 hours. The Velkrans won, but it cost them another 300 ships. Minji and her team fought until the last platform was destroyed, then evacuated through underground tunnels that led to escape ships buried in the Martian desert. As her ship lifted off, dodging Velkran fire, Minji looked back at the red planet and promised herself she would return to rebuild what had been lost. The Velkran fleet regrouped in Mars orbit to repair damage and treat casualties. Talf looked at his losses and felt something close to shock. 1,500 ships gone. 1,500. And they hadn't even reached Earth yet. The primitive planet that was supposed to fall in days had already cost him more ships than the last 10 conquests combined, but Talth was a career military officer, and he refused to show doubt to his crew. He gave the order to advance toward Earth. 8,500 ships remained. More than enough to crush whatever defenses the humans had waiting. The Velkrans had lost battles before. They had never lost a war. Captain Daehyun and his corvette Indomitable rejoined the UEDF main fleet assembling near Earth's moon. His ship had survived the first engagements through speed and luck. Now he prepared for the real battle. Every human ship in the system was falling back to Earth orbit for the final defense. There would be no more ambush, no more hit-and-run attacks. This would be a direct fight, and everyone knew most of them wouldn't survive. Daehyun walked through his ship, checking on his crew. They were young, most of them in their 20s, and they were scared. He didn't blame them. He was scared too. But fear was acceptable as long as you kept fighting. He told them what Admiral Hyun-woo had told all UEDF forces, make them pay for every meter. His crew nodded. They understood. This wasn't about winning anymore. The math was clear. The Velkrans still had too many ships. Earth would probably fall, but humanity could make the victory so costly that the Velkrans would never forget it. They could make Earth the grave of the Velkran fleet. They could show the galaxy that humans didn't die quietly. The Velkran fleet accelerated toward Earth, their massive engines burning bright enough to be seen from the planet's surface. People looked up at the night sky and saw lights moving among the stars. They knew what those lights meant. The enemy was coming. In cities across Earth, people made final preparations. Some fled to underground shelters. Others stayed in their homes, refusing to hide. Parents held their children and told them stories to keep them calm. Soldiers checked their weapons and said goodbye to families they might never see again. President Ji-won broadcast a message to the world, her voice steady, even though she knew billions might die in the coming days. She told humanity to be brave. She told them to remember who they were. She told them that even if Earth fell, even if they all died, they would die free. The Velkran Empire wanted them to surrender and become slaves. Humanity's answer was still the same 2 words, "Come try." Commander Talth heard the broadcast translated into his language. He shook his head at the foolishness. These humans still thought they could win. They still defied the inevitable. He almost admired their courage, even as he prepared to crush them. The Velkran fleet was now only hours from Earth orbit. Soon this would all be over, and Earth would be just another conquered world in the Empire's long history. But Talth felt uneasy. The humans had already surprised him multiple times. What other surprises did they have waiting? What other weapons had they built in secret? He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the tactical displays. The fleet was in position. Earth floated before them, blue and beautiful and completely surrounded by human defense stations and warships. The largest battle in human history was about to begin. The Velkran fleet entered Earth orbit like a storm of metal and fire. 8,500 warships arranged themselves above the planet, blocking out the sun in some places, turning day into artificial night. Commander Talth gave the order to begin orbital bombardment, expecting the human defenses to crumble quickly. Instead, Earth fought back with everything it had. The moon's surface erupted with weapons fire. Defense cannons that had been hidden in craters for decades opened fire simultaneously. They were massive guns, each one the size of a building, powered by fusion reactors buried deep beneath the lunar surface. Their shells were as large as cars, and they fired with enough force to shake the moon itself. Velcran ships that came within range found their shields. Overwhelmed by the sheer kinetic force of the impacts, Admiral Hyun-woo coordinated the defense from his command center beneath Geneva. Multiple screens showed different parts of the battle. Ships exploding. Stations being destroyed. People dying. He forced himself to stay calm and think strategically. Every order he gave might save thousands of lives or cost thousands of lives. There was no room for error, no time for doubt. The UEDF fleet engaged the Velcrans directly. Earth's warships were outnumbered 10-1, but they had the advantage of fighting near their home. They knew every satellite, every station, every piece of debris in Earth orbit. They used that knowledge, luring Velcran ships into traps, hiding behind orbital structures, coordinating their attacks with the ground-based weapons. Captain Daehyun's corvette Indomitable darted between larger ships, like a minnow swimming among whales. His orders were to target Velcran communications vessels, disrupting their ability to coordinate. It was dangerous work. The Indomitable was hit multiple times, each impact shaking the small ship violently. Daehyun's crew fought to keep the engines running, patching damage with whatever materials they could find, refusing to abandon their posts even as sections of the ship lost atmosphere from Earth's surface. Massive laser arrays emerged from the oceans. They had been hidden underwater for years, disguised as research stations or forgotten Cold War installations. The lasers were powered by underwater nuclear reactors, and they fired beams powerful enough to cut through Velcran armor. Ships in low orbit found themselves targeted from below. Attacked by a planet that refused to die quietly, the battle was chaos. Ships on both sides exploded every few seconds. Debris filled the orbital space, making navigation treacherous. Communications were jammed by electronic warfare from both sides. Individual ship captains made their own decisions, unable to wait for orders that might never come. The carefully planned Velcran assault dissolved into thousands of separate small battles. Colonel Yuna commanded Defense Station 7, one of 12 massive platforms orbiting Earth. Her station was home to 5,000 military personnel and 10,000 civilians, who worked in maintenance and support roles. When the Velcrans focused their attack on her sector, Yuna ordered all non-essential personnel to evacuate. 15,000 people crammed into escape pods and shuttles, fleeing toward Earth while Yuna and her military crew stayed behind to buy them time. The Velcrans hit Station 7 with everything they had: missiles, energy beams, kinetic slugs. The station's shields held for 20 minutes before failing. Hull breaches spread through multiple sections. Yuna sealed off the damaged areas, sacrificing hundreds of her crew to save the rest. The station's weapons kept firing even as it fell apart around them. When the Velcrans sent boarding parties to capture the station, Yuna's Marines met them at every access point. The fighting was brutal and close. Humans and Velcrans killed each other in narrow corridors with guns and knives and sometimes just bare hands. The aliens were stronger, but the humans were defending their home. Every meter cost the Velcrans lives. Yuna knew the station was lost. She had maybe an hour before the Velcrans overwhelmed her remaining defenders. She sent one final message to Admiral Hyun-woo, then made her decision. She overrode the safety protocols on the station's 6 fusion reactors and set them to overload. The evacuation shuttles were clear. The Velcran boarding ships were still attached to her station. Colonel Yuna died when Station 7 exploded, taking 17 Velcran assault craft with her. Admiral Hyun-woo watched it happen on his screens. He felt rage and grief and pride all at once. Yuna had bought precious time for those evacuees. She had taken hundreds of enemies with her. Her sacrifice would be remembered, but there were so many more sacrifices. All across Earth orbit, human defenders died protecting their world. Some deaths were quick ships exploding in single devastating hits. Other deaths were slow, crews suffocating as their atmosphere leaked away or burning as fire spread through damaged sections. Every death hurt. Every death mattered. Commander Talth was beginning to understand the true cost of this conquest. His fleet had destroyed 8 of the 12 defense stations and crippled most of the UEDF fleet, but he had lost another 900 ships doing it. That brought his total losses to 2,400 vessels. More than a quarter of his invasion force was gone. The humans were losing the battle, but they were making victory incredibly expensive. Frustrated by the stubborn orbital defense, Talth ordered ground troops to deploy. If the humans wanted to fight so badly, the Velkrans would bring the fight to Earth's surface. Massive landing craft descended through the atmosphere, their shields glowing red from friction and weapons fire. They landed in multiple zones across the planet. Deploying tens of thousands of Velkran soldiers, the ground invasion was supposed to break human morale. Instead, it made things worse for the Velkrans. In space, the aliens had the advantage of superior technology. On the ground, they were fighting in human cities. On human terrain, against an enemy that knew every street and building. Sergeant Taeyang commanded a resistance unit in the ruins of Seoul. The Velkrans had bombarded the city from orbit, destroying major buildings and infrastructure. But millions of people still lived in the rubble, and many of them were armed. Taeyang and his fighters used guerrilla tactics learned from centuries of human warfare. They ambushed Velkran patrols. They planted bombs in buildings the aliens tried to occupy. They poisoned water sources. They attacked at night and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. The Velkrans found urban combat to be a nightmare. Their superior technology meant less when fighting room to room. Their stronger bodies were advantages in open battle, but not when humans collapsed buildings on them or attacked from sewers and underground tunnels. The Velkran military doctrine emphasized honorable combat between soldiers. The humans had no such restrictions. Civilians joined the fighting. Children planted explosives. The elderly provided intelligence and shelter to resistance fighters. Commander Talth received increasingly desperate reports from his ground commanders. They were advancing, yes, but every city block cost lives. The humans refused to surrender. Even when surrounded, even when clearly defeated, they fought until they died. Some humans detonated explosives when Velkran troops tried to capture them, killing themselves and their enemies together. The Velkrans had never encountered anything like this. In an underground bunker in Greenland, Dr. Subin worked frantically on her project. She was a xenobiologist, one of Earth's leading experts on alien life. The UEDF had provided her with tissue samples from dead Velkran soldiers, and she had been studying their biology for weeks. Now she believed she had found something useful. Velkran biology was more complex than human biology, but it had weaknesses. Their immune systems were incredibly efficient at fighting infections from their homeworld, but they had no defense against Earth microorganisms. Dr. Subin had modified a common Earth virus to be even more effective against Velkran physiology. The virus wouldn't kill them. Instead, it would cause intense pain, disorientation, and weakness. An infected Velkran soldier would be unable to fight. Subin knew what she was creating was a bioweapon, banned by every international treaty Earth had ever signed. She knew she was crossing lines that should never be crossed. But 3 billion humans had already died in the orbital bombardments. Cities were burning. The Velkrans had started this war. They had come to conquer. Subin felt no guilt about giving humanity a weapon that might level the battlefield. She packaged the virus into missile warheads designed to spread it through the atmosphere. Admiral Heinwu approved their use without hesitation. The missiles launched from hidden silos across Earth, targeting areas with heavy Velkran presence. When they detonated, they released clouds of invisible viral particles that spread on the wind. Within hours, Velkran soldiers began falling sick. The virus worked faster and better than Subin had predicted. Infected aliens collapsed in pain, unable to coordinate, barely able to think. The virus spread through their ranks like wildfire, passed through shared equipment and close quarters on their ships. Velkran medical teams had no treatment and no understanding of what was attacking them. The ground invasion stalled completely as Velkran forces dealt with the epidemic. Commander Talth ordered his troops to retreat back to their landing craft, but many were too sick to move. Human resistance fighters found Velcran soldiers lying helpless in the streets and showed them no mercy. Commander Talth's retreat order spread through the Velcran fleet like a shockwave. Retreat, the word felt wrong in their language, a concept that barely existed in their military doctrine. The Velcran Empire had conquered for 3,000 years. They advanced. They occupied. They dominated. They did not run away, but they were running now. 7,100 ships remained from the original 9,700. Many of those survivors were damaged, their crews sick from the human virus, their systems failing from weeks of constant battle. They began pulling away from Earth orbit, trying to form an organized withdrawal formation. Organization proved difficult when half the officers were incapacitated, and the other half were terrified. Admiral Hyan Wu saw the Velcran retreat beginning on his tactical displays. He felt a surge of fierce joy, the first real hope he had felt since this nightmare began. The aliens were leaving. Humanity had done the impossible. They had fought off an invasion force that should have crushed them easily, but Hyan Wu was a military strategist, and strategists knew that a retreating enemy was also a vulnerable enemy. He issued orders to every UEDF ship still capable of fighting: pursue and destroy. Show no mercy. Make them pay for every human life they had taken. Captain Day Hyan's corvette Indomitable was barely holding together. The ship had been hit 17 times during the battle for Earth. Half the crew was dead or wounded. The engines were running at 60% capacity. Life support was failing in 3 compartments. But the weapons still worked, and that was all that mattered. Day Hyan pushed his damaged ship forward, joining the pursuit of the fleeing Velcrans. His crew didn't question the order. They had seen Earth burning from orbit. They had watched billions die. If they could kill even one more alien ship before the Indomitable finally broke apart, it would be worth it. Lieutenant Haniel's fighter squadron had been reduced from 12 ships to 4. The survivors were exhausted, running on stimulants and adrenaline, but they refused to stop. They had been trained for this their entire careers. Hit and run. Strike from the shadows. Make every shot count. Now they hunted the retreating Velcrans like wolves following a wounded animal. The Velcran retreat became a running battle that stretched across the solar system. Human ships pursued them past the moon, past Mars, into the asteroid belt. Every Velcran vessel that fell behind was swarmed by human fighters and destroyed. The aliens tried to maintain formation and protect their damaged ships, but the virus made coordination nearly impossible. Dr. Subin's bioweapon was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. The virus had been designed to affect Velcrans who breathed Earth's atmosphere, but it was also spreading through the recycled air systems on their ships. Velcran crews were collapsing at their stations. Medical bays were overwhelmed. Some ships were running on skeleton crews, barely able to maintain basic functions. Commander Talth watched his fleet falling apart and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. Not fear of death, which was honorable, but fear of failure. The Velcran Empire would never forgive this disaster. His name would be remembered for centuries as the commander who lost an entire invasion fleet to a species that shouldn't even have posed a challenge, but personal shame meant nothing compared to immediate survival. Talth struggled to keep his remaining ships together, to maintain some semblance of military order in the chaos. Ships were breaking formation, fleeing individually toward the jump point. Some captains were so desperate to escape that they were abandoning slower vessels. The fleet was disintegrating. The humans had prepared one final surprise. The jump point was mined. Admiral Hyan Wu had ordered the mines placed months ago, long before the Velcrans arrived. It had been a contingency plan, a desperate last measure in case humanity lost the battle for Earth. If the aliens won, they would face one final gauntlet trying to leave the system. The mines had waited dormant in the darkness, programmed to activate only for ships using Velcran engine signatures. The first Velcran ships to reach the jump point died without warning. The mines were simple devices, just nuclear warheads with basic targeting systems. But they were numerous and they were positioned perfectly. Explosions blossomed in the void as Velcran vessels struck the minefield. Ships that survived the mines found themselves under attack from the final UEDF defense platforms positioned around the jump point. Talth realized the trap too late. The humans had turned the only exit from the solar system into a killing ground. He ordered his ships to clear the mines, but that took time, and the pursuing human forces were closing in from behind. The Velkrans were caught between the minefield and the human fleet. The battle at the jump point lasted 3 hours and cost the Velkrans another 1,500 ships. Some vessels managed to clear a path through the mines. Others simply took the damage and jumped anyway, their crews desperate to escape even if it meant traveling through hyperspace with a damaged ship. Many of those vessels never reached Velkran space. They were lost in the void between stars, their crews dying slowly in the darkness. When the fighting finally ended, only 2,300 Velkran ships remained. They jumped away in small groups, abandoning all pretense of military order. Commander Talth's flagship was among the last to leave, covering the retreat of the most damaged vessels. As the Dominion's fist prepared to jump, Talth looked back at the blue planet that had cost him so much. Earth hung in the void, scarred and burning, but still alive. Still fighting. Still human. Talth felt something like respect for these strange, violent, impossible creatures. Then his ship entered hyperspace and Earth disappeared from view. Back in the solar system, the human forces regrouped. Captain Daehyun's Indomitable finally gave up, its engines failing completely. Rescue ships picked up his crew and transferred them to other vessels. Daehyun stood on the rescue ship's observation deck and watched his corvette drift away. The small ship had taken him through the entire battle, had survived impossible odds, and had finally died. He felt like he was leaving behind a friend. Lieutenant Haniel landed her fighter on one of the few surviving orbital stations. She climbed out of the cockpit and discovered she could barely stand. She had been flying combat missions for 6 weeks straight, snatching sleep in her cockpit between battles, eating emergency rations, pushing her body and mind past all reasonable limits. Now that the fighting was over, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She collapsed in the hangar, and medical teams had to carry her to the hospital bay. All across human-controlled space, similar scenes played out. Soldiers who had fought beyond their limits finally allowed themselves to rest. Officers who had stayed alert through weeks of constant crisis finally closed their eyes. The battle was over. The Velkrans were gone, but the cost was terrible. President G1 emerged from her bunker for the first time in 6 weeks to survey the damage. Seoul, the city where she had been born, was mostly ruins. 3 billion people had died worldwide, more than a third of humanity's population. Orbital infrastructure was destroyed. Satellites were gone. Communication systems were crippled. The moon bases were damaged or abandoned. Mars colony was wrecked. Earth had won, but Earth was broken. Admiral Hyun-woo began coordinating the recovery efforts. Rescue teams searched the rubble for survivors. Medical ships treated the wounded and sick. Engineers assessed the damage to critical infrastructure. The work would take years, maybe decades. Humanity would rebuild, but they would never forget what the war had cost them. Dr. Subin reviewed the reports on her bioweapons' effectiveness. The virus had worked better than her models predicted, spreading through the Velkran fleet and incapacitating thousands of enemy soldiers. It had saved countless human lives. But she couldn't feel proud of her creation. She had designed a plague. She had weaponized disease. The fact that it was necessary didn't make it right. She requested permission to destroy all samples of the virus and all research data. President G1 denied the request. The virus needed to be preserved, studied, potentially modified for future threats. They lived in a hostile galaxy now. They couldn't afford to throw away weapons just because they made people uncomfortable. Subin understood the logic, but it still made her sick. She wondered what else humanity would sacrifice in the name of survival. How much of their morality would they have to abandon to stay alive in this new reality? The Velkran ships that had escaped limped back toward their empire's space. Many didn't make it. Ships with damaged hyperdrives failed mid-jump and were lost. Ships with sick crews ran out of food and medicine during the long journey. Some vessels simply disappeared, destroyed by unknown causes or perhaps by the human virus mutating into something even deadlier in the recycled ship environment. Commander Talth's flagship reached Velcrin space with only 40% of its crew still functional. He immediately sent a priority message to the High Command, detailing the disaster at Earth. He knew his career was over. He would probably be executed for the failure. But the Empire needed to know what they faced. The humans were not a primitive species. They were not easy prey. They were something the Velcrin Empire had never encountered before, a species that would rather die than submit, that fought with absolute commitment. Commander Tal stood before the Velcrin High Command in chains. The chamber was vast and cold, designed to make those being judged feel small and insignificant. 12 members of the High Command sat in elevated seats, looking down at him with expressions that ranged from anger to disbelief. Behind them, the walls displayed images of the Velcrin Empire's greatest conquests. 847 worlds, each one a testament to their military superiority. Earth would not be number 8. 140-8. Talth had spent the journey back preparing his report. He knew it wouldn't save him from execution, but it might save other Velcrin lives. The High Command needed to understand what humanity was capable of. The Empire had never encountered a species like this before. He spoke for 3 hours, describing the battle in detail. The hidden weapons platforms in the Kuiper Belt, the mines disguised as debris, the suicide attacks by damaged ships, the urban warfare that turned every city into a death trap, the bioweapon that spread through his fleet like invisible fire, the sheer, absolute refusal of humans to surrender even when defeat was certain. The High Command listened in silence. Some of them were clearly skeptical. How could a primitive species destroy an invasion force? How could humans, who had barely left their own planet, defeat the Velcrin military machine? But the evidence supported Talth's story. 17 ships had returned from 9,700. The data logs from those ships showed the same battles, the same losses, the same inexplicable human tactics. And there was the virus. Samples had been collected from sick crew members. Velcrin scientists confirmed it was an artificial bioweapon, designed specifically to target their biology. Grand Admiral Vexen, the oldest member of the High Command, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. He asked one question: should we return with a larger fleet? The chamber fell completely silent. Every eye turned to Talth. This was the critical moment. His answer would determine whether the Empire launched another invasion or left Earth alone. Talth thought about the burning cities, the desperate human defenders, the soldiers who fought until they died and then kept killing as their ships exploded. He answered honestly. No, Grand Admiral. We should never go near Earth again. The chamber erupted in angry voices. How dare he suggest the Empire retreat? How dare he recommend leaving a species unconquered? The Velcrin Empire did not surrender. They did not show weakness. They did not leave enemies alive. Talth waited for silence, then continued. Humans call their world Earth, but we should call it by another name, the Graveyard. That planet consumed our fleet. It will consume any fleet we send. The humans built their entire civilization preparing for invasion. They spent centuries developing weapons and tactics for this exact scenario. Fighting them on their territory is suicide. Grand Admiral Vexen studied Talth carefully. You believe they would defeat us again? Talth nodded. I believe they would destroy twice as many ships next time. They learn. They adapt. They turn every advantage against you. And they are willing to sacrifice everything to remain free. The High Command debated for hours. Some demanded immediate revenge. Others argued that resources should not be wasted on one planet when the Empire had thousands of other worlds to consider. The debate grew heated, with members shouting at each other, something rarely seen in the usually disciplined Velcrin command structure. Finally, Grand Admiral Vexen called for a vote. The decision was made unanimously. Earth would be quarantined. No Velcrin military vessels would approach within 50 light years. Automated trading stations could be established at the perimeter, but no direct contact. Humanity would be left alone. It was the first time in 3,000 years that the Velcran Empire had voluntarily avoided conquering a species. The decision was classified at the highest level. If other species learned that the mighty Velcrans had been defeated, it could inspire rebellion across the Empire. Back on Earth, the recovery continued slowly and painfully. President G1 worked from a temporary government center in New Sydney, one of the few major cities that had suffered relatively light damage. She coordinated relief efforts, managed resources, and tried to maintain order as humanity struggled to rebuild. 3 billion dead. The number was too large to truly comprehend. Every person on Earth had lost someone, family, friends, neighbors. The grief was universal and crushing. But humans did what they always did when faced with tragedy. They kept moving forward. Admiral Hyun Woo had been promoted to commander of planetary defense. His first priority was analyzing the captured Velcran technology. Every destroyed alien ship was a treasure trove of advanced systems and weapons. Human engineers studied the wreckage, learning how Velcran shields worked, how their weapons generated power, how their engines achieved faster-than-light travel within a year. Earth had made massive technological leaps. Human shields improved dramatically. Human weapons became more powerful. The first experimental faster-than-light drive based on Velcran technology was tested successfully. Humanity had paid a terrible price for this knowledge, but they were determined to use it. Captain Dae Hyun, now promoted to admiral, oversaw the construction of Earth's first true interstellar warship. It was designed using lessons learned from the battle, incorporating both human and captured Velcran technology. The ship was named the Defiant, a reminder that humanity would never submit to alien conquest. The Defiant was not defensive. It was built to project power, to carry the fight to any enemy that threatened Earth. Its weapons could destroy a Velcran battleship with a single sustained volley. Its shields could withstand orbital bombardment. Its engines could reach distant star systems in weeks rather than decades. Admiral Dae Hyun walked through the ship during its final construction phase, inspecting every system personally. He remembered the desperate battles of the invasion, the friends he had lost, the close calls that had almost killed him. The Defiant represented humanity's promise to those who had died. Never again would Earth be vulnerable. Lieutenant Hanyul, also promoted to commander, led the training program for the new generation of UEDF pilots. She was harder on her students than her instructors had been on her. The war had taught her that second place in combat meant death. Her pilots needed to be the best, needed to be ready for anything, needed to be as ruthless and creative as the generation that had saved Earth. Dr. Subin continued her xenobiology research, but now her work had official support and unlimited funding. The government wanted her to study every alien species they encountered, to find weaknesses, to develop bioweapons that could be used if necessary. Subin did the work, but part of her wondered what humanity was becoming. They had survived by abandoning the rules of civilized warfare. Would they ever be able to go back? 10 years after the invasion, Earth had transformed completely. The cities were rebuilt, often better than before. Orbital infrastructure was restored and expanded. Colonies on Mars and the Moon thrived. Humanity had spread throughout the solar system with new confidence and capability, but more importantly, humanity's mindset had changed. They knew now that the galaxy was full of hostile species. They knew that peaceful coexistence might not always be possible. They had learned the hardest lesson. Sometimes survival meant being willing to fight dirty, to use any weapon, to never show mercy to those who would enslave you. President G1's term had ended, but she remained active in galactic affairs. Humanity had made contact with several other species, mostly through the automated trading stations the Velcrans had established. The other species approached humans cautiously, having heard stories about the species that had destroyed a Velcran fleet. Earth established diplomatic relations carefully. They joined the galactic community not as supplicants seeking protection, but as equals demanding respect. Other species learned quickly that humans were friendly to those who approached peacefully, but utterly merciless to those who showed hostility. The story of Earth's defense spread across the galaxy. Different species told different versions, but the core truth remained. Humanity had fought off the Velcrin Empire. 9,700 ships had come to conquer Earth. Only 17 had returned. The math was simple and terrifying. Commander Tauth had been executed for his failure. But before he died, he wrote a detailed manual on fighting humans. The Velcrin military classified it as required reading for all officers. The manual's core lesson was simple: never fight humans on their home ground. Never underestimate their willingness to sacrifice. And never assume they will follow the rules of civilized warfare. Some species began calling humans by a new name in galactic trade language. The Defiant Ones. Others called them the Survivors. A few particularly cautious species simply referred to Earth as the Forbidden Planet and avoided human space. Entirely, humanity's reputation grew. When a brutal empire called the Faxon Collective attempted to raid human merchant ships, the UEDF response was swift and overwhelming. Admiral Dehayan led the Defiant and its battle group directly to the Thaxon homeworld and delivered a simple message: return the stolen cargo and personnel, pay reparations, and never touch human property again. Or face the same fate as the Velcrins. The Thaxons returned everything within a week.